Breaking news this Wednesday night, We Charity shuts down in Canada. What's happening to the organization immersed in controversy? Warnings about a second wave.
We are not out of the woods.
Rising COVID-19 cases that could lead to restrictions being reimposed. Plus, how to avoid getting the flu during the pandemic. Multi-million-dollar investment.
We are at a disadvantage.
Federal support for Black Canadians building their businesses. And America's exploding wildfires. Towering flames and choking smoke roar through the West Coast.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news about We Charity, the organization at the heart of the latest ethics investigation involving Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We Charity is shutting down its Canadian operations, and its co-founders, brothers Craig and Mark Kielburger, are stepping away. The charity ran into trouble after the Liberal government awarded it a sole-sourced multi-million-dollar contract to run a student volunteer grant program. That contract was pulled, and the close relationship between the charity and Trudeau, his family, plus the former finance minister, Bill Morneau, has come under intense scrutiny. Abigail Bimman is in Ottawa with more details. Abigail, what reasons are the Kielburgers giving for shutting down the charity they started?
Donna, in a statement released this evening, the Kielburgers point to two things, the pandemic and the politics, which the founders say they are, quote, ill-equipped to fight.
Over the past 7 months, We Charity has experienced a series of unprecedented challenges. And so to protect the beneficiaries, to protect the projects that we created around the world, we will be closing We Charity's operations in Canada.
As the Kielburgers often point out, this all started 25 years ago with the idea of children helping other children in developing countries around the world with a variety of different community projects. The organization has already had layoffs and a board turnover over the past few months. In their testimony on Parliament Hill, the Kielburgers talked about the big impact the pandemic has had on their bottom line. There's still a big question here over how much of this decision is due to the pandemic or due to the political storm that erupted over the Canada Student Service Grant, the deal worth nearly $1 billion, with We standing to earn up to $43.5 million. It emerged the organization got that government deal after members of Justin Trudeau's family, including the Prime Minister's mother, brother and wife, were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaking fees. The deal in the end was cancelled. The grant program never got off the ground. Tonight, the Prime Minister's office tells us it has no comment about the news, while the Ethics Commissioner's office says the Commissioner is focused on the two investigations still underway into the Prime Minister and the former Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. The news about We doesn't change that.
And Abigail, We Charity runs a number of humanitarian programs overseas that help children who live in poverty. Do we know what's happening to those programs?
That's an important point in all of this. As for those international aid projects, We is planning to sell off assets, including its Toronto headquarters. They say they'll use the money to fund an endowment to keep those projects going. The endowment will also allow them to keep the curriculum and other material developed over the past 25 years accessible on the website. But the Kielburgers say there will be no new school, water, or health projects developed. Donna?
Okay, Abigail Bimman in Ottawa on the We Charity. Thank you. Shifting now to the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges emerging as countries navigate how to keep the virus from spreading and avoid bringing back tighter public health restrictions. Here in Canada, it's already happening. New rules for bars and restaurants and nightclubs are coming into force in British Columbia. Other provinces with rising case numbers are weighing their options and watching countries like England, which is reimposing restrictions. Most social gatherings larger than 6 people are being banned there. More on that in just a moment. Here in Canada, with infections on the upswing in a number of places, the public is being reminded to take COVID-19 seriously or face the consequences.
The last thing that anyone wants is to have to once again shut down our economies and suspend our lives to try and counter a massive second wave.
Here's the picture on new infections reported today. There were no new cases in Atlantic Canada, with the exception of PEI, where there were 2 new infections. The province with the most new cases today was Quebec, 180. There were 149 new cases in Ontario, 98 in Alberta, and 100 in British Columbia. In that province, new measures are coming into effect to try to prepare for what's feared the fall and winter might bring. Apart from those new restrictions shutting down nightclubs and banquet halls, the province is pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into its healthcare system. Global's Keith Baldrey is in Victoria tonight. Keith, what's that money going to be spent on?
It's a fair amount of money, Donna, $1.6 billion, largely to hire a lot of people in the healthcare system. 2,000 people are going to be hired to help seniors in long-term care homes. 5,000 people are going to be trained as healthcare aides in hospitals, cleaners and food supply workers. But the centerpiece of the plan is to purchase 2 million doses of flu vaccine for the upcoming influenza season. And Dr. Bonnie Henry, the provincial health officer today, pointed out this is the largest immunization program we've ever seen in BC. Here's the doctor.
Our fall influenza campaign is going to be on a scale that we have not yet seen to further protect people who are vulnerable in this province. And we encourage everybody who's over the age of 6 months to be immunized for influenza.
So again, that flu vaccine is going to be widely distributed, and an expectation we're never going to see a higher number of vaccinations than we're going to see this year. Interestingly, back to those 7,000 people who are going to be hired, Donna, all of them, the priority is to hire people who've been laid off in the pandemic in the service and hospitality sectors. That's been hit the hardest. Those people will get first crack at these jobs. The biggest hiring program BC has ever seen is taking place in this pandemic. Donna?
All right, Keith Baldrey in Victoria, thank you. In the UK, tighter COVID-19 restrictions are being reimposed on Monday. Prime Minister Boris Johnson revealed the new rules in his first coronavirus briefing since July. The so-called Rule of Six is coming back, limiting most social gatherings to just 6 people. Police will enforce the measures and issue fines or make arrests if needed. Johnson also floated the idea of a rapid test, like a pregnancy test for COVID-19, that people could take every morning. And he claimed it's still possible to get life back to at least closer to normal by Christmas.
I want to be absolutely clear. These measures are not another national lockdown. The whole point of them is to avoid a second national lockdown.
The Rule of Six does not apply to workplaces or schools in England, and there will be exemptions for weddings, funerals, and some organized team sports. More than 2,600 new COVID-19 cases were reported in the UK today. There's been a setback in the human clinical trial of a vaccine for COVID-19. Pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca is pausing the final phase of its clinical trial because of an adverse reaction in one of the participants. There are reports the person experienced neurological symptoms consistent with a spinal inflammatory disorder. The company, which is working with Oxford University, is now looking into whether the illness is a side effect of the vaccine trial or a coincidence. Pausing trials is not unusual during vaccine development when there's an unexplained illness. It's unclear how long the investigation will take. The highly anticipated vaccine was expected to be available as early as January. Another book is coming out about what's claimed is really going on inside the Trump administration. This one doesn't rely only on anonymous sources and is backed up by audio recordings, including of President Trump himself. It reveals that back in February, when he was telling the nation COVID-19 is no worse than the flu and would soon disappear, he knew that wasn't true, yet he deliberately misled the public. More than 190,000 Americans have now died of COVID-19. The U.S. has the most cases and most deaths of any country in the world. The book is called Rage. It's written by Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward. Jackson Proskow explains what it reveals.
But I think it's going to work out good. We only have 11 cases, and they're all getting better.
While the president was busy downplaying the threat of COVID-19 in public,
there's no reason to panic because we have done so good.
In private, he expressed alarm to veteran journalist Bob Woodward in a series of recorded interviews. In early February, Trump explained he clearly understood the risks of the virus, admitting COVID-19 was highly contagious, deadlier than the flu.
It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
2 weeks later, this is what Trump told reporters.
And they recuperate. Like if you have the flu, you recuperate, you get better.
In a later interview, Trump acknowledged purposely downplaying the threat.
I wanted to I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
That was long before 190,000 Americans had died from the virus.
Did you mislead? Well, I think if you said in order to reduce panic, perhaps that's so. The fact is, I'm a cheerleader for this country.
The problem is now worse in the U.S. than in any other country. Trump still insists there was no way to prepare.
You didn't really think it was going to be to the point where it was.
His rival, Joe Biden, seized on the revelations, which are now likely to dominate the campaign.
He had the information. He knew how dangerous it was. And while this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose.
Jackson, there have been other tell-all books about Trump and his administration. What makes this one different?
Well, what's different, Donna, is hearing from Trump directly in his own words on tape about an issue that impacts every single person in this country, whether through the pandemic itself or the devastating economic collapse. And Donna, we've been told more damaging drops from this book could come in the weeks leading up to the election.
All right, Jackson in Washington, thank you. The pandemic has disproportionately affected Black Canadians. It's highlighted inequalities that have existed and persisted for generations, including for Black Canadians who want to start their own businesses. A statement from the Parliamentary Black Caucus makes this point. It says, "It is hard to change what one cannot measure. For too long, the socio-economic realities faced by Black communities are invisible because of a comprehensive lack of data." Today, the Prime Minister announced a multi-million-dollar program to collect that data and to help break down barriers systemic racism has created. Eric Sorensen reports.
Little Jamaica, a largely Black business community in Toronto, has been hit hard by major subway construction and by the downturn from COVID-19. But all of that comes on top of decades of systemic racism towards Black businesses in this country.
The cost of running a business as a local business or as a Black entrepreneur is higher.
The Benny Boo fashion shop has faced barriers like higher insurance premiums that make it hard for Black businesses like this to get loans from major banks.
We are at a disadvantage being a Black entrepreneur. Financial benefits are not readily and easily available to us given certain systematic discriminations.
Earlier this summer, the Prime Minister promised to address injustices faced by people of color. Now, he's met with Black business leaders to announce a new program with major Canadian lenders to address the financial barriers Black people face. The program includes a federal fund up to $53 million to help Black entrepreneurs with financial planning, training, and mentorship. The biggest part, along with Ottawa, major lenders will put up the lion's share of $161 million to provide loans up to $250,000 specifically for Black businesses.
By working with financial institutions, there is much greater access to capital for these Black businesses which face systemic barriers and discrimination every single day.
We have been shouting that from the mountaintops.
Andrea Barrett of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce says the racial injustice seen this year has been a wake-up call for governments and the big banks.
It's not always the same for a Black person as it is for someone who isn't Black. We're pleased with today's announcement and pleased that the financial institutions are involved.
There's little data on discrimination towards Black entrepreneurs in Canada, so the federal program will also create a knowledge hub to identify both barriers and opportunities for growth.
How and when, yes.
Benny Buka remains skeptical of big lenders, but she hopes systemic barriers to Black businesses are finally being addressed. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
The battle for democracy in Belarus. Coming up, why this Nobel laureate called for diplomatic backup to protect her from arrest. It has been exactly 1 month since that disputed election in Belarus, and the crackdown against opposition activists is intensifying. Only one member of the opposition's Coordination Council remains free in Belarus, and her freedom is very much in limbo, as Redmond Shannon reports.
It's rare that any public figure would welcome a barrage of cameras at their front door. Nobel Literature Laureate and opposition activist Svetlana Alexievich told reporters masked men tried to break into her apartment on Wednesday. Note her reinforced door. After the incident, European diplomats came to show their support for the last member of the opposition's Coordination Council to remain free and inside Belarus. Earlier Wednesday, Maxim Znak was taken into custody. It follows the mysterious detention of Maria Kolesnikova at the Ukraine border this week. Fellow council members said she tore up her passport to avoid being deported with them. Their exiled leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, was in Warsaw Wednesday, EU member nation Poland donating a city building to the opposition movement.
I will try to answer you why our protests are so unique now. First of all, it's led by women.
And supported by women. For a second day running, masked Belarusian police arrested groups of female protesters. Over the weekend, hundreds of people were arrested and many were allegedly beaten.
I know somebody who was going to go, but then she changed her mind because she was quite afraid, which is understandable.
This Canadian in Belarus worries he could be deported if we reveal his identity.
One of the fears I have is, you take the underground, take the subway, and you accidentally come out at the wrong metro station, and you find yourself being arrested for being at the wrong time at the wrong place.
President Alexander Lukashenko told Russian TV his 26 years in power may have been too long, but says he won't step down. He again spoke of interference from the West, suggesting he's being watched by American satellites. Since the disputed election, he has looked east to Moscow for support. The protesters of Belarus, stuck in the middle, insist they just want free and fair elections. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
This is what driving through San Francisco looks like right now. Coming up, the fires ripping through the West Coast. Drivers across Utah witnessed this yesterday. At least 45 semi-trucks were blown over by hurricane-force winds of more than 120 kilometers an hour. 4 drivers were hospitalized. Officials say many of the drivers had ignored warnings about the high winds. Powerful winds along the U.S. West Coast are whipping up flames and preventing fire crews from containing a line of fires that now stretches from California to just south of the Canadian border. The smoke has triggered air quality advisories for the Vancouver area and other regions in southwestern British Columbia. The situation on the ground in parts of Washington state is dire. In one town, a fire destroyed 80% of buildings, including the local fire station. And this explosion in Oregon happened last night as a wildfire roared along a highway south of Portland. Thousands of people have been forced from their homes. The record-setting outbreak of fires in the state has scorched more than 80,000 hectares of land. In California, about 10 times that much land has burned, and thousands of homes and businesses have been destroyed. And the smoke made for an eerie sight in San Francisco. Bay Area residents woke up to this, a blanket of thick orange haze blocking the morning light. People in some areas reported ash falling like snow. There are more than 40 fires burning. Some started weeks ago. It's been extremely hot in California, and high winds fanning the flames are expected to continue into tomorrow.
Tonight we honor Hollywood's best and brightest.
Next, how the Oscars are changing to increase diversity. The biggest award in the movie business is making a change. The Oscars are adding new criteria films must meet in order to be eligible in the Best Picture category. The goal is to improve diversity and inclusion on both sides of the camera. Mike Armstrong explains.
There have always been criteria for a movie to be considered for Best Picture, and some of them are a little strange. For example, it has to have been advertised specifically in Los Angeles on something like a billboard. Well, the new criteria announced Wednesday have a more obvious goal. The Academy wants to increase the presence and visibility of women, people from racial or ethnic groups, the LGBTQ+ community, and people with cognitive or physical disabilities.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us.
The Oscars released a series of videos over the last week explaining how too often the industry comes up short.
Cinema is really, it's like the home movie of the world, isn't it, really? It's where we go and we see ourselves, and we're not there. And when we are there, we're horribly misrepresented.
Got room for one more?
Now, it's not the highest bar to have to get over. There are 4 new criteria for a movie to be considered in the Best Picture category, and it only has to meet 2 of them. The first is on screen. Standard A sets a threshold for actor representation and storyline. The rest are behind the camera. Standard B is about the film's creative leadership and project team. Standard C is about internships and training opportunities. And D is about the group behind the marketing, publishing, and distribution. This move comes after years of controversy and criticism. The recent Oscars So White campaign even made it into the broadcast.
Tonight we honor Hollywood's best and brightest.
They finally listened.
Elamea Tailfeathers says the Academy may have been pushed, but it's a positive step. The Indigenous filmmaker says when people from her community aren't seen on screen or on set, it isn't a lack of voices or talent, it's a lack of opportunity.
This pushes production companies to not be lazy in the way that they hire and the way that they operate.
Well, take care, ladies.
Tailfeathers says she hopes in 10 years to have the freedom white men have to talk simply about their work, instead of having to talk over and over about difficulties getting work. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the sunset in Steep Rock, Manitoba. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.